More than half of Americans say that their fellow citizens are morally bad. And about 80% of Americans believe that we're deeply divided when it comes to our moral values. What's driving this division, or at least the perception of this division? In this episode, I examine a pretty simple question. Why do my guests think that America feels so divided right now? One of the central questions behind this podcast is trying to understand how Americans see and experience the division in our nation. In this episode, my guests talk about what they believe is driving those divisions. They offered a lot of explanations, but three themes surfaced again and again and again. Their sense is that first, the loudest and most extreme voices in our politics drown out the middle. Second, they've got a sense that the media thrives on outrage and division. And third, political leaders who tend to pour gasoline on fires instead of trying to put them out. According to my guests, these forces push people to retreat into political teams and identities. And once that happens, the division only deepens.
There is definitely people on the far right, people on the far left. And for some reason, I think we hear more from those people. I feel like most people are like me. They fall like probably somewhere really close to the middle. And I feel like that's the majority of people. I just feel like we have some really loud extremes.
I think that normally it's probably like 5% on either side. And then right now it might be 10, even 15% on either side. But I don't think it's ever the majority of people. But what has happened is that 10, 15% has been able to clog so much of the conversation that you get that 8 and 10, or possibly 9 and 10 at this point, who say, man, this country is divided. But I think that we see them now a lot more, and they can congregate a lot easier and get their message out a lot more. And then you end up hearing those opposing sides, and neither one of those sides is necessarily trying to win the other side. I think they're trying to shut down the other side.
I think the people that are more moderate on both sides of the spectrum are less vocal, both in terms of volume, from quantity to volume in dynamic range, how loud they're speaking, how often they're speaking, and how much they're saying. There seems to be a lot less conversation in here and a lot more noise. I'll put my hands up here. Less in here and more out here. And that's the extremes polarizing both themselves and the other side.
The media has changed recently. Relatively recently, in the last 20 years at least, that there's been a significant change in how we get our news and what is actually being reported to us. And there's been a lot of conversation around that. Are we hearing truth, or are we hearing the same stories repeated until they become truth because they're repeated so often? How do you tell? How do you know what really happened in any situation? There's so much emotion that gets involved in it.
Part of me wants to think that it's the media creating it out of not just the media, but political entities. I don't know if you want to say the parties are doing it to a certain extent, but they've got the media joining in, they've got education joining in. Education should never be ideological, but it has become so. And they are certainly making it appear as if we are widely divided.
You've seen local newspapers disappear, and so what used to be where you could pick up the phone and you could call a reporter And then I knew some reporters when I ran for political office in 2010 and everything. For example, I knew some reporters. I could just pick up the phone and call them. They're like that and explain something. And then it would sometimes appear in print, sometimes it wouldn't, because it wouldn't make a story like that. But at least you're getting it out there.
My own personal theory also is that we lost a shared story for our country. And that would go back to more of maybe internet and cable news. When I was younger, there was, at 5 o'clock at night, you turn on the local news and there was a handful of options to choose from. And then you could get the national news after that. And again, there's 3 or 4 options to choose from. But for the most part, people were getting the same story of what kind of country we live in, what experiences we were having, what things were happening. And you could go to opinion pages on newspapers and get opinions and things, but we've got news networks now where the majority of the programming is opinion and it's not news. And we are creating completely different realities out there. So we've lost a shared story. And so it's hard for us to connect at times.
I can't remember who it was that was saying that, like, what is the definition of a country? Does it have a shared language, a shared culture, a shared vision, shared values, like those types of things? And I don't see any of those things in our country right now. From a high level, like individually, I see groups of people that have those things, but as a united group, I think that's missing, and that's a dangerous place to be. I think as a country, to not have that level of unity and shared perspective.
A media that thrives on conflict and strife. So, the media and politicians, pundits like to feed that conflict, which then obscures the common ground that we have.
So if I'm looking for clicks or I'm looking for viewers, I want to make sure that everybody hears the story that I already know they want to hear. Fox will report a given event based on what they already know their subscribers want to hear. And CNN will do the same. And MSNBC and ABC and ad nauseum.
The real sharp split, I think, was when Trump took office. He was pretty divisive. I feel like before then there was a level of disagreement, but there was still a shared picture of a unified front. But I don't know what it is with Trump. Like he's a firebrand that, like, I feel like has caused more division in his tweets and his inability to keep his mouth shut.
Trump's entry into politics, I think, has been a sort of gasoline on the bonfire, like throwing gasoline and then lighting all of that. I think his entry into politics, has created more division, which has fed on pre-existing division. Just the way he does things has, I think, created blinding effects on all sides.
President of the United States is one of the rudest people I've ever seen. But I mean, if he can get away with it, I guess anybody can.
So he loves to communicate via Twitter, which probably got him elected in the first place, but also it opened him up to potential avenues that probably shouldn't have been explored, where he would get into tit for tats with actors and actresses and negative things of that nature.
And also I do think some politicians kind of throw red meat to their base on both sides, to make it seem worse than it is. I mean, the way that they talk to each other and about each other is pretty disrespectful and does make things, like, if our leaders are speaking that way to each other and about each other, it's pretty disheartening.
Several guests pointed to a troubling consequence of this dynamic. Once people retreat into political teams, they begin to feel a responsibility to defend those teams, those groups, those tribes. and that defense can come at a cost. Sometimes it means overlooking the bad behavior of one's own group. Sometimes it means ignoring inconvenient facts. And sometimes it means defending things that people privately know aren't true, or worse, people become so blinded that they can't tell what's right or wrong. In other words, once politics becomes about protecting the tribe, the truth and ethics, they take a backseat.
We're often telling people, I'm right, you're wrong. And people feel defensive on that. So they're trying to find avenues in which they can prove, hey, I'm right about this. And they go online and they find something, whether conspiracy theory or otherwise, to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, to make them feel more like just better about themselves.
I think human beings have an inward desire to be identified with something bigger than themselves. And so and again, I don't know if that's necessarily universal, but it's just my opinion, what I've seen, yada, yada, yada. And then you take that natural bent, which is not good or bad, you take that natural bent and then you sit social media on top of it that only shows you how good your tribe is and how bad the other tribe is. I think that's baking soda and vinegar. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And this tribe over here is bigger than me. I'm identified with it. And so I need to protect it.
People circle the wagons, with the like-minded people. Being in a group gives you a sense of belonging, and you can feel validated. You can feel like you're on the right side of history. And it's almost like a very defensive thing, to be in a group is safe.
I think it gets back to our psychology again, like human psychology, which is that a primary need that we have is to be part of a group. Like, I'm in this tribe, I'm in this group, and I will do anything to defend my group. We will put defending the group at any cost above ethics and reality.
David, what it really is like we're on teams. This is almost like Orwellian, where you're in a constant state of war against, was it Oceania? Oceania was against there was another nation state named, and so they kept this war going to keep their slavery in place of the entire human frame. So we have these two camps in America today, but it looks a little bit bleak.
Together, my guests offer a pretty sophisticated explanation of the psychology behind our divisions. When people feel threatened or believe their group is under threat, they instinctively defend the tribe. And once that tribal instinct kicks in, the pressure to protect the group can override almost anything else. In a sense, many of our divisions and instincts to defend our tribes are more about human psychology than about ignorance or cruelty. So if we want to overcome divisions, we have to face the fact that our divisions are more about our mental wiring than anything else. That's ultimately the challenge we have to face. I'm David Combs. This is Nobody's Side. Thanks for listening.